Well, hello, everybody. I hope you're having a good Gartner conference. I'm Eve Mailer, founder of Venn Factory. I'm very pleased to have with us today Gal Helemski, a leader of PlainID. Our co-presenter, Dileep Moturi, has been unfortunately detained. We hope he'll still arrive. We're here today to talk about authorization, what makes it so darn complex, and to simplify the matters for you. And Gal is an internationally known expert on the subject, and I know that you'll get a lot out of what we share today. So let's talk about what is so darn complex. Is it that it's static? Is it that there's too many policies? Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Eve, and it's great being here with you.
Pleasure.
So first of all, authorizations traditionally have been considered to be complex. Complex than, authentication, which is just opening the door, sort of. But then, what's so complex about authorization? First of all, you can't see. You can't see actually who can access what. Why? Because it's in the application. It's in many cases the responsibility of the developers, and that is a challenge. And nobody wants to deal with code, right? That makes it much more complex. So that would be number one. Second, they are all over the place. If you think about a typical identity journey, like identity starts with authentication, then it goes through multiple control options, such as, a network gateway, an application, an API gateway, whatever, eventually reaches the data. Each and every one of those technologies have a control point and also a policy that defines what the user journey should be at each and every stage. But it's all over the place. It's not consistent. And also, it is managed in multiple languages. Like, you wouldn't manage a policy for your authentication, the same as you would for your APIs, the same as you would for any, the same as you would for your data. And that's part of the challenge.
So, what you're saying is really interesting. Welcome, Dileep. Thank you. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm hearing that there's so many application points, so many different owners. Maybe we can ask Dileep to weigh in on this as well. What makes authorization complex in your case?
So in terms of what is complex is because traditionally, when we used to develop applications, we used to think authorization within the application. That's, if you think about any of my, even today when we deploy homegrown apps or when we deploy some vendor procured apps, still the mindset or the design is around authorization being internal to the apps. So the concept of going to an external system and fetching the decision and then enforcing that, and that's where the challenge is. There's no standard today, that's one of the big challenges. Yes, there is a standard for my SSO. All the applications that I buy today is supposed to be supporting an external single sign-on connected to an IDP. That's how any SaaS product is being designed today, but that's not the case with authorization. I think that's a challenge. As an implementationer, that's where we see as a challenge.
So there's challenges in making it that shared service because it's so distributed. Fantastic. Okay, so why don't we talk about the motivations for what the benefits could be if we could simplify this? So Gal, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think it starts with efficiency. Today, organizations are investing so much into those controls. Just think of the addition to the development process that you need to have in order to have all those controls in place. Additionally, in each and every product you're implementing, like think of a Snowflake or a Databricks, you need authorizations control internally, and you need to invest into developing them. So it's inefficient doing that multiple times, over and over and over again, not only multiple times, but also learning yourself, like the different languages and the different technologies. So that would be a #1 priority in my view. And then it ties very nicely into security. If we don't have the sufficient controls, because it's very hard to manage and maintain, that directly leads to lower security controls. So those would be my top two. What would you say?
No, yeah, definitely. I think like it's beyond the security, the way I see it. Like, in our example, just I'll take a step back and quickly talk about the scenario what we solved at Cisco, right? So I will paint the picture. So imagine we have a line of business that's doing a $10 billion revenue per year. And then like this line of business is nothing but our what we call as a TAC, our own customer service. We have around 30,000 employees in that BU across the globe. All these, many of them have access to sensitive customer data. Right, I don't have to elaborate what is a sensitive customer data here, but you can understand that part. So now the question here is, of course, like we want to make sure that the right people have right access at the right time when they need it. Not only that, but no, that is not only a security concern, it's a business enabler today. Because that's a differentiator for Cisco when we go and sell our services to our customers. In these geopolitical scenarios, what we're talking here, like our customers are very sensitive to their data today, right? They want to make sure that they have a consent, they're providing a consent on who get access to their data. And there's a geolocational challenges what the customers are facing, and they want to make sure that, hey, certain employees of Cisco in certain geographic locations can only access their data, so on and so forth, right? Now they are ready to pay, in fact, like they're ready to pay a higher cost for the additional SLA that we are going to provide who got access to their data, right?
So this is really interesting because what I'm hearing is, access control is, it's easy to say, well, the CIO cares and the CISO cares. But I would say access control is about security, but it's also about monetization, isn't it? I mean, it absolutely is a business enabler from what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's key.
Yeah, I think that's what makes authorization so interesting. It's not just for, not just for supporting your security, supporting your business in a secured way.
Yeah, and it's very deeply involved with those applications that make that business happen.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's talk about, well, how would you go about simplifying the picture? What is now currently complex, you want to make it simpler, what do you do?
Yeah, okay, so we mentioned that traditionally authorization is a more complex area, and that's the perception as well. But today, I think there has been several improvements and evolvements that make it more simpler. Well, first of all, policies. Policies are a way to make the authorization management much more simple. That's one. Second, there are tools, many tools in the market that makes the whole authorization, management, and enforcement much, much simple. And the last thing I want to mention is the control and usage. It's not all up to developers. I think that's a very important point. Many organizations have been trying to, delay the problem because they didn't want to start rebuilding applications and all of that. But there are other solutions today, and it's not all to the developers. It's not all in the code. It's not all in that space. There are ways to enforce authorization, to enforce, your business policies, the contextual, the fine-grained, the dynamic, not just by developing into the code stuff.
Yeah. Again, how it is being simplified, I can give some examples, but I'm more coming from an implementation standpoint, right? Especially if someone in the room, if they're planning to implement this, I'll try to simplify that. I'm trying to break down my thoughts into people, process, and technology. End of the day, I'm looking at this as more of I've implemented multiple technology solutions for Cisco, not just IAM, but I've been doing that. So how did I approach and what is my learnings from this experience? Here is people, process, technology. Number one, technology is very important. When we're choosing this, build an architecture that is modular and that can scale. Because, and the reason why I'm saying that is when we started this journey, the biggest concern is think about that, the 10 billion line of business I'm talking about, it has around 60 plus different applications of different technologies. Some of them are homegrown, some of them SaaS products, some of them are API gateways. But end of the day, as a business owner, what they're looking at is hey, now I'm introducing a new change in this ecosystem, and this new change or this policy engine is going to be a critical component from reliability standpoint? What if this policy service is not available? So that's a business concern. So me as an IT person, like the first thing is like, hey, how do I build an architecture that is scalable and that is also modular, like in the sense like every application has their own requirements of how do they interact with the system. So I think like when we pick the product, what we picked, like it provided us the ability to provide a modular solution. Like, do you want a PEP? Do you want a PDP? In what format? Where do you want to deploy this? Like on-prem, on-cloud, wherever it is. I think that's the technology part. Once we start building an architecture in that format, that makes a lot of things simple. That's number one. Like number two, from a process standpoint, it's always about, again, this is not a rocket science, but always the challenge was resistance for the change, right? Like because at the end of the reason they're resistance for a change is because of skepticism of can this solution scale and perform, right? How do me as an owner, like how can I go and demonstrate that we are building a solution that can scale? And that's what we did. We started with when we started, the initial requirement was like, hey, do this for all the 60 apps. But that's going to take us longer time, and the business want to see some results. So what we said, like, hey, let's take an MVP that's tangible enough to show you guys value. So we gain the confidence from business. Yes, this solution can scale, and that's what we did.
So I'm really hearing something that's rhyming, right? Because we have the experience with single sign-on to actually make it a shared service, which it took some doing over the years, right? And I think I agree that authorization, it just involves more application semantics. Everybody can sort of agree on authentication semantics. We've sort of standardized, things in OpenID Connect.
Yeah.
But when it comes to authorization, yes, there's more variability there, if you will. But one of the sayings used to be, very old, I remember this saying. People would say, don't develop security code, like don't write your own crypto libraries, develop secure code. And that's how we got more shared services that could do that job. So doing that authorization job involves, don't write the access control yourself, have it done professionally, basically. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because we got to get better and faster at this, don't we?
Absolutely. I want to, touch something that you mentioned. I think that's a key point that we are trying to share in this session. You mentioned that you faced the challenge of enforcing authorizations and access controls in multiple technologies like the API gateways and the applications and the data platforms, and so on and so forth. So again, you did face that very big, complex challenge. So maybe you can share why the policy concept kind of fit into that place to cover.
Yes, that's a good question. And that's where, because that's a dream we started selling initially, and then like 6 months down the line, I actually showing the value of practically the dream is now implemented, and that's what big. If I think back, I was super happy after 6 months because let's say day one we started with one single policy for one single use case, and we showed them that is how to plug in this policy into all these systems. Now the business came back and now they gave me 2 more policies, and within 2 weeks we are able to turn around and implement the policy in the system without touching any of these systems. So that's where business was super happy at 2 times. Like when I was able to show them I can scale from a performance standpoint, because that was the first concern. Hey, can your system scale and perform? And then I showed them, hey, we achieved that. Now give me more policies. We deployed the policies. Within 2 weeks, they can see the policy being implemented across the systems.
So you're getting them hooked on policies. I love this. And are these business level policies, or how are they expressed? Are they expressed in terms of the business?
Yeah, so I think on the policies, we're still maturing that whole model. But initially we spent really good time working with business, helping them to define the policies. We spent a lot of time on the ownership, because at the end of the day, we want to have the policies owned by business. So we worked with them on how can they write a policy that can easily be understood by engineers, and that can be easily converted into a system. And then we also gave an interface so they can come and look at the policy, what is implemented in the system.
That's fantastic. So there's visibility to all those parts of the business that wouldn't ordinarily think they care, but you're helping them care. I want to turn to kind of soup to nuts, like what you've been through here at Cisco, and talk to us about, the case study A to Z?
Yeah, I think I kind of covered that. Like number one, we spoke about the complexity or the requirement what we started with, and the apprehension initially was a lot of pushback, in the sense like because they know that the change is very, if any disruption in that particular business LOB is going to directly impact our revenue and our customer satisfaction, our ability to support our own customers.
So you had metrics around that specifically?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Right?
Okay.
And then the way we came together is like we brought in the business owners, we brought in our security team, and then like I have application owners, because I'm a service provider there, like, but I have all these applications owned, and we have application owners.
They're your internal customers, essentially.
Customer, right? And then like my team, like we all came together and then figured out like what is the right scope that is good enough that we can deliver. Because I don't want to sign up for something that I cannot show results in next 6 months, right? At the same time, I don't want to.
About a phased approach then?
Yeah,
Phased,
and then, we did a phased approach. Like, and then like we said, like this is the right scope, and then the results of this scope will excite my sponsors to sponsor this program further, right? What is good enough for our sponsors to continue to invest on this program? That's what we tried to figure out sometime. We went a lot of back and forth. What is the scope? Like, because a lot of times these sponsors are the C-suite guys, like they don't really tell what they want, but we need to figure out what they want and show them, you know what, this is the right scope that for the investment what you're making in this program, you'll see a result in this time period.
So how many lines of business are now taking this approach? Are you still rolling it out?
Yeah, we started with our first line of business as a CX or the TAC business. And now we are talking about expanding this to our partner organization and then some of our engineering organizations as well. Like now that's in the backlog.
So this really has impact on the extended enterprise beyond your walls. Yeah. So how has that gone? Did you need to do much convincing, or were they also asking you for policies?
Not anymore. The first 6, not anymore, and that's what I was really happy about. Is like I don't have the job of selling this anymore because I have the results that are speaking for the TAC organization what we did. Now the other BUs are approaching my team. You know what? Like we want to get on your bandwagon and work with you guys. Right? So that's what is happening. That's a successful
IT project right there. Yeah. What were some of the metrics that you were looking to hit, and did you hit them?
So a couple of metrics, like from a business standpoint, I think the problems was a little bit complex than what I explained. Like when we started, one of the complexity of this, like we had a role explosion in that like LOB. So our problem was twofold. Like the solution is like number one, redefine those roles. And then like move all these users into these new roles. That itself is a big change.
That is a big change. Was it a painful, complex change, or was it assisted by what you were doing with PBAC, policy-based access control?
And then like apply PBAC on top of those roles with more of, I think but PBAC is completely transparent to our end users. Like we don't have to really tell my end users what's happening in the backend system. For them, role migration was a big change because they used to have there's a different role, and the problem was like almost every role used to give access to many things. We faced a lot of pushback from end users on the role migration, but PBAC was completely transparent to them for our end users, right? So our metrics, going back to your question, like how are we migrating these users to the new roles and how the systems are adopting, and the performance, like for example, like now we did a benchmark of what is the login time, like what is the response times they're getting, and then like by adding a PBAC on top of that, what's the additional lag what we are adding into the whole transaction. So that was one of the metrics. These two, I mean, like, and the last one is like, hey, are we delivering what we committed for the business? That was the last metrics, like, right?
That's the keep your job, not keep your job metric, basically.
Yeah. So that.
And you're still here, so glad to hear it.
Yeah. So I think that's how it was. It was like, I mean, you don't believe like the lot of time went into planning and then getting a pushback because of the apprehension of this is a huge change we don't want to implement. We almost spent more than 1.5 years on that part of it. Like, but actual, you know what, like once we decided this is what we're going to do, this is the scope, it only just took 6 months for us to achieve all these results. I mean, that goes back to authorization is not as complex what we think. And that's what I learned after these 6 months. It's not as complex
That's a great takeaway for an organization as large as Cisco as well. It's amazing.
That's really the bottom line here. I think the majority of the time is around convincing that this is something you really need to do. It's not as complex as you think. It can be simpler. And then...
Yeah. And by the way, I did not mention, like, we worked with PlainID. That's the product what we worked with.
Okay.
And I think like again, we can talk more. I don't want to sell it. It's not a sales conversation here, but like definitely, if I think back, one of the reason, like, I mean, forget about PlainID. Like, I think the product what you have to select, especially for the organization of our size, has to be more of a flexible and general purpose. I think that's one key factor. The point I'm trying to drive is, you can choose any other product. I'm sure there are other vendors there selling this product. Some of them are specific to certain areas. Some of them are very generic. In our case, because I said the complexity and the size of the ecosystem what we had, we choosing this particular vendor product really helped us in. Because I was able to build that modular solution that can fit into Salesforce. Like, we implemented on Salesforce, we implemented on MuleSoft. We are working on Snowflake, right? And then we have our own homegrown solutions. So imagine one solution that can fit all these different vendors. That was the key, because if not, then I could have just stuck with just one, integrating with one. I would have spent 1 year just with one vendor, which was not an enterprise class solution which I was trying to provide to my end users.
Yes.
Yeah, and sounds powerful, yeah.
And I think that's another point, again, to our discussion of simplicity. Policies are everywhere, right? Whether in your code or in your Salesforce or in your Snowflake or in your API gateways, there are policies. And the approach should be, how do you consolidate all those policies into a way you can easily manage them? You get the visibility, which we mentioned at the beginning, the central management of all those policies, and eventually you make the whole process much more efficient than it is today, where it's so distributed and scattered all over the place. And I think that's really the point.
Yeah, I want to pick on one thing you were talking about around, sort of being able to re-architect roles. I mean, one of the things I've heard some of your folks say is, role explosion is a problem, but it's kind of a symptom of not being able to do your policies right.
Yep.
Exactly.
In a simplified way.
Yep.
And I think that's a major kind of realization that people need to have, because everybody has the role explosion problem.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we ended up having those many roles is, like, imagine, like, I'm just making this up. A TAC engineer for US, TAC engineer for Canada, TAC engineer for Europe, like, and then I keep on exploding that role, because instead of me able to apply a policy for that kind of a persona based on some attributes, I ended up multiplying that role with all those permutations and combinations, and then we ended up having all those role explosions. Yeah.
So you're actually able to kind of factor it out as if you're doing math equations, and you end up with just, x equals 4 at the end. Nice and neat, sounds like.
Yeah, I think, many think of policies as just another fancy role, but it's not really. It's not a fancy role. It's a decision. It should represent a business decision that takes into account all factors of that decision, including who the identity is, whatever we know about the identity, what the identity is trying to access, and any environmental conditions that you want to take into account. Now, if you think about policies in that way, you can already see how they simplify the overall management process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on top of that again, like, if we're talking about this whole authorization, the world of authorization, like, a lot of companies, even some of my own internal users, they come back and ask me, hey, why do you have an IGA and why do you have a PBAC? Because each of them has to play their own roles. I think like in terms of maturity, the way I see is, like, if someone is starting this journey, start with the IGA, like, because that's a fundamental thing. But very soon, like, as you mature, you need to have a better way of, because security has to be at a very fine-grained level. Like, it's not like a olden days of, like, having a role and then you're managing. You can't really manage in this world where we are. Like, we can't just limit ourselves at a coarse-grained level. Like, we have to look at a fine-grained level, and the only way to achieve fine-grained level is, because if you're trying to think about any ZTN or anything, like, you're talking about very fine-grained level access control. And the only way to achieve is through PBAC.
So we've got a little bit of time here left, and I'm going to pull on that thread. Fine-grained. We often hear about needing to get finer-grained, more dynamic, more contextual, more adaptive. So maybe you can both talk a little bit about how you see this landscape and how agile we can make authorization and when we should do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pick up on the last thing you said. IGA defines the identity and sets the identity roles, and it should continue doing that. That's good. But it kind of only opens the door. But then what? We don't want that responsibility of what happens after. Yes, we do. It's our responsibility, and that's where authorizations come into play. Now, should it be as fine-grained as possible, as dynamic as possible? Not necessarily. I mean, it really needs to fit your needs. It can be very fine-grained, it can be very dynamic, but it's also tied to, one, your business requirements, and second, the capabilities of the technology you're using. Not all technologies enable you to be as fine-grained as you want or as dynamic as you want. But that's part of the tooling we were speaking about, making authorization simple. As an authorization solution should be able to accommodate different levels of authorizations, from medium-grained to fine-grained, dynamic, partial dynamic. There are multiple patterns here that you need to consider. You just need to know that it does exist. So, to kind of complete that answer, should we be fine-grained as dynamic always? No, not always. It doesn't always fit what we need, but we need to be able to accomplish that when that is really needed.
Yeah, and so what about examples from the Cisco world? Maybe different lines of business or different examples where it makes sense?
The way I am seeing that is, even in Cisco, each BU is at a different level of maturity where they are in terms of applying the controls.
Okay.
Right, because my counterparts on those BUs they are responsible for their data, their security. So I'm more of an internal, I'm a service provider for them I'm providing them platforms and capabilities to implement the controls, right? So each of them, when I look at let's say my engineering is at a different level, my supply chain is at a different level, and my CX or the customer support organization is at a different level. And they're also operating on a different regulatory requirements as well. Right? My finance is at a different level. And so I would ask them, if someone approaches me, hey, Dileep, we want to do something here, I would recommend them to start with a RBAC level, because that's easy to implement. You will immediately start seeing results. And, right? And as that organization matures, I will prescribe them, okay, now go implement more of a dynamic authorization level.
So it's another way to phase as the different organizations get higher ambitions, having succeeded in the beginning.
Exactly. Start with something simple that you can show a value, and you can start deploying some controls, and then start maturing. That's how I'm sure everyone in the industry does the same thing, but that's my answer. Everything, both of them are important. End of the day, we have to show results and gain the trust of our stakeholders, and we have to figure out a way how to do that.
Well, this is wonderful. I want to thank you, Dileep. I want to thank you, Gal. Thank you so much for sharing with the audience. If you want to know more, we don't have time for questions now, but you can ask your questions at booth 333, and I hope you'll seek them out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.